Alrighty, let's go back to the Planet of the Apes universe with Rise of the Planet of the Apes, which is my absolute favorite film within this franchise. Let's review. Rise of the Planet of the Apes is a reboot that came out in 2011 and is essentially the origin story of how the apes got smart and took over the planet and how the human race got progressively sick and extinct. And it all started with a chemist who was trying to create a cure for Alzheimer's, and so they tested on apes. One of the apes goes crazy, but that's because that ape was trying to give birth, and so he comes across the ape's baby. He names him Caesar, he raises him, and of course the ape gets smarter. And the smarter Caesar gets, the more he starts to question his place in the world. He gets put in an ape shelter, and he eventually gives all the other apes the antidote that makes them all smarter. They break out and start to overrun San Francisco. Now, I really mean it when I say Rise of the Planet of the Apes is my favorite in the franchise. I remember my freshman year in college, I saw this in the theater, and I think we can all agree that a lot of people, myself included, that when we left that movie in the theater, we all agreed that if we were to give it a special award, we would give it the It Didn't Suck award. Because, let's face it, Planet of the Apes was in a slump thanks to the Tim Burton remake, but in this movie it got it back on track. It was the CPR that this franchise needed. But what I personally love about it is basically just the slow progression on humanity's downfall. It all started with Will, played by James Franco, who was just trying to find a cure for Alzheimer's because his own father, played by John Lithgow, he's also suffering from Alzheimer's. And the cure, it does work for a little bit, but then it starts to progress, but then it also makes the apes smarter and stronger. But meanwhile, he finds the next step in the cure that does make the apes even more smarter, but then it also starts killing the humans. And watching the original Planet of the Apes movies, I also realized that this movie does take some inspiration from Conquest of the Planet of the Apes. Now, before I continue with this review, let's also go back to the Lassiter archives, because I do remember rewatching this movie and reviewing it for its 10th anniversary. Rise of the Planet of the Apes is celebrating its 10th anniversary, and it is definitely one of the prime examples of a reboot done right. I remember when this came out and everybody put this in the It Didn't Suck category. As far as Planet of the Apes reboot trilogy, Rise is my favorite. You cannot watch this film and not marvel at the storytelling of how mankind started its own downfall and how the apes rose above the humans, and it was just the tip of the iceberg. And that is what I love about this film, which is the progression of how the apes rose through Caesar leading them with his growing intelligence. Of course, Andy Serkis has to be praised for his work on this film, and little do we all know, that was also just the tip of the iceberg of what he was give us with the next two films. Rupert Wyatt did his thing on breathing some new life into this franchise back in 2011. I'm gonna give Rise of the Planet of the Apes the hands up emoji because it is definitely a masterpiece. I definitely echo those sentiments in that review. You cannot watch this movie and not marvel at the amount of detail and the storytelling on display. And having watched those original films, I also noticed details that I never noticed before, like the ship going into space. That is the same ship that Charlton Heston's character was on in the original movie. Now, when they are going to follow up with that in the rest of this reboot series, we don't know. Now, James Franco, you would think that he would be the main character in this movie, but he's really not. And I'll get more into that in a bit, but James Franco, he's really the secondary character. And I do like how they warned him in the beginning, do not get attached. And he did get attached, which made it even more hard for him and more heartbreaking when he has to separate himself from Caesar. James Franco, he's just the secondary character. The real main character is Caesar. And like I said in my original review, Andy Serkis' work in this film, as well as other films and even beforehand, it must be praised here, because between Rupert Wyatt, the director, and Andy Serkis, the two of them, they breathed new life into this franchise. With the CGI, it looks almost realistic, and it will just get better and better with each movie. But even aside from the CGI, you can also see Andy Serkis' performance here. And it is a crime that with each film that the Academy does not consider him for an Oscar. And one other thing that I like watching this film in context with the original films is that, and I even mentioned this in my review of Battle for the Planet of the Apes, is that one thing I've always appreciated about both versions of Caesar is that Caesar, he knows that deep down, not all humans are bad, but because of circumstances and nature, he has to be with the apes. And that's definitely highlighted here. And even at the end, when he's going up against the humans, of course he has a vendetta against some humans, but there are some that he will let go. It's like, no, this human, he's fine. It's that compassion that Caesar has, and he wishes that both apes and humans can find a way to coexist, but That's just not going to happen. I mentioned earlier John Lithgow plays Will's dad, and yeah, his story was just heartbreaking because he was suffering from Alzheimer's and he had a good 8 years of his mind intact, but then it's just started going back and getting worse. And I even love that little scene where he's trying to give him some antidote, but then with the last shred of intelligence that he had in him, he's like, no, just stop. Just let me be. This is no way to live. Like, to me, I like moments like that. Just no words are spoken, but just through the movements and the performances, you know what's happening. David Oyelowo plays shady science businessman who just thinks about money and not what the drug is doing to people. And of course, that also led to the downfall of humans. But the chimp jail is also my favorite part in this film because it's essentially the middle half and then it leads into the final act. And when Caesar, he gets put in there, all the other apes, they're antagonistic to him at first. And then we also get to meet some of the other apes like Rocket and Maurice, who will become Caesar's boy throughout all these movies because he's the only other ape in there that actually knows sign language. And then there's also Koba, and I will definitely talk more about him in my review of the next movie. But Koba, yeah, he's one of those apes where all he knows is that humans are bad, and he doesn't know that there's good ones out there. And so that's just took a toll on him, both physically and mentally. But the whole ape jail sequence, or ape shelter, I should say, they're all in there, and the humans that are looking after them is Tom Felton. Yeah, Draco Malfoy. Tom Felton's character, he's just horrible to these apes. And so when we get that moment where Caesar, he stands up for himself and all the other apes, just roll the clip.
Take your stinking paw off me, you damn dirty ape!
No! It was at this moment that he knew. He fucked up.
See, as you can see, the more you fuck around, the more you're going to find out.
I remember when I saw that in the theater, you just heard nothing but gas and just nothing but silence. Because we all know that line and we all knew it would eventually pop up here as a way of fan service, but then just to follow up with him speaking for the first time, that's how you subvert expectations. And then we get to the actual uprising where the apes, they're just running them up all throughout San Francisco. And all the humans, they don't know what's happening. But then also, that's when the virus, it starts spreading and killing off humans. Like, I could talk more about this movie, but what can I say? Like, I feel like this movie elevated the franchise to a whole new level. And it would just elevate the franchise even more with more movies going forward. But this will always be my favorite just for the simple fact of it is the origin of how the apes got smart and started taking over the planet and humanity's downfall, and just the level of storytelling and detail that was put into this film. It was just a huge surprise to me back in 2011. I'm going to give Rise of the Planet of the Apes the hands up emoji because to me it is a masterpiece.